Hi, welcome to Play It Loud. If you haven't, please subscribe. It gives me some encouragement. This is the soul one. And I want to go back to the Starlight Ballroom in Greenford. Spent a lot of time there in the mid-60s. Soul music, for me, started around 62 and frankly ended when Otis Redding died. That's soul music as I understand it. But before we get into that in detail, I want to go back to the Starlight. On the radio the other day, Boom Radio, it's a UK station that's dedicated to those of us who are past our best. They played a record by Neil Christian. You probably never heard of him. Very few people have. He had a top 10 hit, 66, 67, something like that. And he played at the Starlight Ballroom. I went to see him. Frankly, he wasn't very good. And there were quite a few people there, but it was by no means full. And his set wasn't very old before people had drifted towards the bar and gone to the back of the ballroom. At some point, he quit his set, presumably to go and have something to drink, maybe something stronger. And he left his backing band to fill in for 10 or 15 minutes. His backing band only played instrumentals. I remember they played a track called Hava Nagila, I think a Jewish folk song. And they were superb. And they'd only just started. They hadn't been playing for more than 2 or 3 minutes before people were leaving the bar and heading back to the stage. This was a band on fire. They were really, really good. And I've never forgotten them. The lead guitarist of that band, back in Neil Christian, he made a few records later in his career. I've got a couple of them here. You might recognise them. There's one. There's another. That one's quite obvious. So, thank you, Jimmy Page. At a really young age, he was clearly a gifted musician. He stopped people in their tracks back then. Now, coming back, there were a lot of scratch bands who played back up, filled in the time. Gary Farr and the T-Bones, I think, were one that I recognised by name, but there were lots of them. And all, without exception, covered American singles, soul singles. And they were singles that never made the charts at the time. The two most favourite tracks were two Sam and Dave tracks, Hold On I'm Coming and You Don't Know Like I Know. I must have heard those by at least 10 different bands. Most of them didn't do a very good job. The only person who really did, and we can't ever recreate what he did, was Gino Washington and the Ram Jam Band. They were superb. They really were something else. They held a stage covering American soul singles of the time in the same way, albeit on a smaller scale, as Springsteen does today and has done for the last 30 or 40 years. They filled their ballrooms. They had to stop people getting in. They literally packed them out, and they were fantastic. They released a couple of albums. They're still on CD, but they're not very good. He was a live band. They tried to recreate it by making a live album in the studio. Didn't work. He was a showman, and he needed an audience, a proper audience. And in those days, I don't think you could record live very well. Beatles didn't make a very good job of it at Shea Stadium, so you can't really expect somebody to have done it a few years earlier in Starlight Ballroom. But moving straight in to soul music. Soul music, I think soul music was a number of people. Don Covey, Eddie Floyd, Sam and Dave, Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, the Bar Keys, Booker T and the MGs, mentioned Otis Redding, Lee Dorsey. I saw Lee Dorsey at the Starlight Ballroom, and Lee Dorsey had a couple of hits. I think Ride Your Pony was one of them. Working in a Coal Mine. Really small guy, did a great little set with, I think, an English backup band. They couldn't afford to bring them over in the time, but at this age I can say I was in the presence of somebody who was recording with Alan Toussaint, and he's a legend. So yeah, one removed, but Lee Dorsey was really good. Let's move on to the ones that I've just mentioned, if you like. The exciting Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett, Land of a Thousand Dances, Mustang Sally, In the Midnight Hour. This was music that was played in the clubs and played in every club, and yet I don't think it got into the top 20 as singles. I might have been misremembering, but it never got played on the radio, except maybe the pirate radio stations, but the clubs didn't stop. That's the Lee Dorsey album that I'd recommend, but not easy to get hold of. He's not remembered these days, and it's a pity. Okay, I've mentioned the cover bands. This is who they covered. Sam and Dave were a fabulous act. Apparently couldn't stand each other, and sadly they've both passed on now. I think the last one only last year, not very long ago. They made some absolutely wonderful music, and Hold On I'm Coming and You Don't Know Like I Know, two of their best known tracks. I Thank You was covered by ZZ Top. It's been covered by quite a few people. You need to hear this album, and you need to play it loud. There were others. Soul Men. They had a Christmas single. Soul Men, the title track. That did get some plays, and it did do very well. You've got to play that loud. All right. If you do, just for a minute, the bass and the drums on Hold On I'm Coming, I'm going to point you in that direction because it was superb. It was really good. These are people who were covered. The Rolling Stones covered Otis Redding, Pain in My Heart. I don't know, several other tracks don't come to mind immediately. Later, David Bowie, Knock on Wood. They were staples of the time. Now, the one, come back to the beginning, Otis Redding. Now, most people know at least of Otis Redding's Otis Blue album. It's a fabulous album. Respect, My Girl. There isn't a bad track on it. Old Man River. It's a fabulous album. But this gets missed. It's called The Dictionary of Soul for a very good reason. It is a dictionary of soul. It's my favourite Otis Redding album. And the reason it's my favourite Otis Redding album is for two tracks in particular. The first of which is Try a Little Tenderness. Otis Redding didn't make a bad album. And if you're going to pick up on him and you haven't heard him before, don't skip Otis Blue, but do make sure you include The Dictionary of Soul. The other track on here is a cover of the Beatles' Day Tripper. Give you a pretty good timing of when it came out. It's not a bit like the Beatles, and that's how it should be. The soul music, the people who made this, the Muscle Shoals, the Stax, the Atlantic, they did it their way. Nobody else did it like that. Nobody else ever has. You got to go back to that period if you want to hear real soul music. Now, there's one other album that I want to feature because people will maybe pick up and say, well, I remember this period, but yeah, you left a few people out. And maybe I have, but there's one I've left out on purpose. James Brown. James Brown live at the Apollo, again, a famous album. James Brown really knew his stuff, and yeah, I suppose he's soul music, but he wasn't on Stax. He wasn't on Atlantic. He didn't have Booker T backing him. He had his own well-drilled band, and they didn't sound the same as the Otis Reddings, the Arethas, the Eddie Floyds, most of whom enjoyed the same people backing them, Booker T and his band, with the horn section. So yeah, I'll give you that there may have been others, but if it wasn't Stax and it wasn't on Atlantic, it wasn't soul music.